Kia ora and welcome to CIO Leadership Live New Zealand. I'm your host, Kathy O'Sullivan, editor for CIO New Zealand. And my guest today is Sarah Thirlwall, Chief Transformation Officer at Lotto New Zealand. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here and excited to hear all about your work at Lotto New Zealand. So can you tell us a bit more about your role and what you're doing at Lotto New Zealand?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Transformation Officer. I've been here for just over a year now, and the role is to help define and communicate our business strategy. So that's kind of to make sure that it's aligned to our organisation objectives, that it's purposeful, and that it inspires us to want to work and make a difference, and to be clear on what we want to achieve, I guess. And then how we will deliver on that strategy. So I work across the organisation, and that's from the board, the exec team, to all of our staff, and it's to help share those strategic initiatives, how they relate to our strategy, and how they allow us to create basically incredible experiences for our players and achieve better business outcomes. And that, of course, is to return funding to the New Zealand communities. So my role is also to strengthen practices and help improve our ability to deliver on those investments so that we do achieve the outcomes that we have committed to. So that's essentially my role.
Fabulous. So transformation is obviously at the heart of that. And transformation is a term that's often used as a buzzword, and, it's kind of seen as a given within organizations, but in reality, transformation is quite hard to do. So what have you learned? How has that approach taken shape in your own career?
I think to start with, I've always been the person that says, seriously, why are we doing this? Because while we might know or not know how to do something or how to get somewhere, we have to know why we're even trying. Otherwise, it just sort of feels like we're busy doing stuff rather than actually achieving a goal or feeling that success. So I'm constantly thinking there has to be a better way, particularly if something's not quite working or if it's taking a long time. So I guess those traits have sort of come into my career, and that I'm always looking for new challenges. I enjoy getting to know new industries and learning from others. I started out in healthcare, which was a bit odd, as a medical laboratory scientist. So I moved into data analytics, very early data analytics, and then computers and projects, and then project management, project directorship, and then more into that digital strategy, and now into more organisational strategy, which of course has that large digital component to it these days. So I've had lots of challenges along the way, I guess. I've learned a lot through successes. I've learned a lot through really tough times and working with some pretty difficult people. I've learned lots of strategies for coping, working around people, getting the best out of teams, and always trying to move forward. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but essentially, I guess my career I've transformed by staying curious, looking at the bigger picture, and I guess learning new skills, and that's either through formal training or from others, or through actual living through experiences.
And Sarah, you've touched on this there with, you saying that always starting with the why for transformation. So walking back from that end point of transformation, what other kind of are the key steps that CIOs must take along the way?
Yeah, sure. I always do start with the end point. So what is it, not just the end point, but also how does that feel? How do you want your customers to experience that future or that end goal? And that is also about how you then want your stakeholders or your board or your shareholders to feel. And so what does success then start to look like? And then, of course, you go back to, well, where am I now? And what are the gaps that we have in an organisation, and how might we get there? And there might be a number of options. I think an important thing is to understand the timeframes, because it is great to have a long-term view. You need a long-term view, but you also, if you've got funding for a year, or if you've got board members for a set period of time, I think it's important to have some deliveries within there. Otherwise, it is very hard to be seen as someone that is credible in the delivery space. And for me, delivery is really strong. I feel that you can tell a great story, but unless you deliver on that story and you're able to communicate how that relates back to your strategy, I think it's really hard to understand the transformation that you're creating.
Now, you spoke earlier about difficult people, and people are certainly a huge part of any transformation. What other are some of the common roadblocks or challenges that you think must be, either considered or that you can avoid along the way?
Good question. A couple, I guess. Buy-in's really important, and it's so critical that you've really got to make sure you've got buy-in for transformation and the need to transform almost before you accept a role, because you need that right at the board level, at the exec team, all the way through. While you will help create that story, you've got to get that initial, why does this organisation need or want to transform? And I think, so that's a challenge if you don't have that. I think that I kind of always turn a problem into a solution. That's just how I talk. So you need that clear strategy and you needed that roadmap. So, you don't want to have that barrier where people can't, and I'll talk a lot about line of sight. I'll probably come back to it a number of times. And I think another barrier is funding. So it is hard to get the funding without that buy-in and that sort of line of sight, that clear strategy. So funding is important because transformational funding is usually pretty heavy funding required. And to achieve that in an organisation, you're often taking funding off another area of the business. So it's really important that everybody signs up to that, including those that are missing out and why. And then I guess they're going to want to see some time frame or some improvements. So it's important to put some deliverables in that funding window, because you need to be able to show that you're using that money well and you're on that journey to transformation. While you might not achieve transformation in year one, you have to have achieved something, in my view, to justify that ongoing funding. I think people and capacity is a challenge, of course. And so if you've got a transformation program, you need to look at what capacity and capability you have in the organisation. You may need to hire in expert advice or a person with that particular capability. My only warning there would be to make sure that that is a fit with your culture as well. I find that very important, to be able to work together and collaborate. Or you need to invest in your own people and provide them some training, or work alongside an expert that you bring in for a short period of time to lift the skill of your organisation.
That's a really great point about that culture fit. It's so important. And I really enjoyed your earlier comments as well earlier about how successful feel like, because I think that's often overlooked, when people are planning for what the end looks like, but actually what it feels like. It's really powerful. Yeah. So I'm curious then, and you spoke earlier about deliverables. Do you think there's ever an end date to transformation? Should it be viewed as a project with a deadline and milestones and deliverables, or is transformation just now an ongoing development in any business?
It's kind of both. I don't think it can be open-ended. I find that it's a journey, and I know it's kind of buzzword journey, but you do need those incremental stages. So at Lotto, we've come back and looked at sort of that 3 phases. I know there's multiple phases of transformation, but you could narrow it down to sort of those 3 key ones, which would be foundational. And then it's that growth phase, which is leveraging foundation, and then that, that continuous improvement. So if you look at the foundational stage, you're all familiar with technical debt, and you may not be able to move forward until you do a number of upgrades or platform replacements. It doesn't have to be things like that. That can also be, building your capability. And I said that about, investing in your people. So you may need to grow something like your data and analytics team, for example, in order to transform in a particular way. You may want experts really going out there with sustainability and broader outcomes. And so, or it might be something like compliance. You might need to do documentation, lift your standards, and so that you achieve a certain level of compliance to be able to move forward. And that can be quite an investment in that foundational stage. And it's important to recognise you're in that stage. And then, while it doesn't have to be completely linear, you can then move into a growth phase if you've made those foundational investments. So that's where you get that rapid step change, leveraging those foundational investments. And then after that, I believe you head into system optimization. So you continue to scale and make those continuous incremental improvements.
That's great. Some really valuable insights there. So Sarah, as Chief Transformation Officer, in what ways do you collaborate and influence Lotto New Zealand and its leadership team?
A number of ways. I guess I try to provide that, first of all, that line of sight, and I know I've mentioned that, and I believe that's fundamentally my job, is to just create that really good view from our business purpose, our goals and objectives, and categorise these. We have strategic pillars at Lotto, so those are our focus areas, 4 focus areas, and it's important to then break work into those just to make it digestible. We then have lots of ways of communicating this. So we have an annual board focus session every year, at the end of the year. We then roll this into a staff strategy session, and with COVID this year and the last year, it was pretty difficult. So I converted those into what we called lunchtime strategy sessions, where you came along and one of the executives talked about one of those strategic pillars and what they had planned for the coming years, which was really, people have feedback that they've really found those useful. We also then have quarterly, what we call quarterly offsites, where the execs and senior leadership team get together to talk about what's coming up and how well we're going in achieving our objectives for that quarter and looking at the quarter ahead. And then I go along to team meetings to talk about things, to anchor people on maybe there's a project and how does that relate back to our strategy. And I think the important thing across an organisation is to have that common language because that helps with collaboration and it helps influence through conversations. So I have a lot of conversations, I do presentations, I've implemented formal governance, and that also helps, and just to reinforce those standards and ways of working.
And I guess that all helps with the buy-in, right? Because you're not only explaining the why, but you're getting everyone on the same page about the how you're transforming, which is great to hear. So, Sarah, the role of CIO is evolving. Even the title CIO is changing quite a bit in different organizations. So, what do you think are some of the key successful attributes of a modern day CIO when it comes to leadership?
Okay, probably the most important, probably it's to do with my role, is creating that linkage. So it's selling the story on how technology and digital investments can contribute to an organisation's goal or growth or vision for the future. It helps get a seat at the exec table, and I know all CIOs want to be able to do that so that they can influence change across an organisation. And obviously you get credibility from understanding, conveying the technical requirements or the technical components, but you need to remember to always translate that back to the impact on customers, staff, or your business objectives, I guess. I think, to me, I'm always saying get to know your business. You can't be a CIO behind your desk. You've got to understand the pain points, what are the goals, what motivates or excites people. We've got a cool thing at Lotto under our Slack channel. We have donut dates, and that's where it's quite strange, where you're randomly paired with someone across an organisation and you turn up for a donut date or just a coffee. It can be a virtual meeting, and you just talk about what your role is and who you are and get to know each other. And so when you see someone, that was really good over COVID as well, because when you went back to the office and you see them in the corridor, you can start, you're one step ahead of starting that conversation in their context, and they can talk to you in your context. So I highly recommend something like that. It's sort of like speed dating, I guess, across the organisation. But it's a really good 30-minute investment of your time. I think the other thing I've got is that reflection, that resilience and sort of reflective practice, I probably call it. And it's probably fairly obvious. I mean, you win some and you lose some in CIO roles, and it's important to face that it's not really failure, but you need to look at how might you've done things differently if you didn't quite get where you were hoping to get to. You may need to shuffle the deck if you didn't get that funding approved, or that additional FTE that you felt you needed. So it is that sort of reflective practice and resilience. I always recommend seeking external expertise when you need it, but also don't do that at the expense of investing in your people. So invest in your people, and it doesn't always mean training. That can just mean making sure you're communicating with people. So that's one thing they always ask is just, I need to know where I'm going. I need to know what my role is. I need to know how I contribute to that. So it is providing that for them, and then helping them with ensuring they've got the skills for the job, and providing an opportunity to grow those skills.
Yeah, that people piece is so important, and I love that donut date. What a neat idea. And so, just on that that subject of culture, I mean, how do you think how can you create, a really positive internal culture that really helps people feel connected to the organization and helps them feel like they're thriving in their roles?
A great part of my role is I get to work across the whole organisation. And so our people and culture team are doing some great work understanding our employee value, what our employees value. And the feedback they've had is things like they want to be doing work that they're proud of. They want to be making a meaningful difference, which is great at Lotto. And they want to be belonging to a group of people with good vibes. And being recognised for the contribution we all make. And this helps us grow personally as well as professionally. And they've come up with Winning at Work initiative, which I just love the sound of. And there's 6 focus areas. We're just launching it. And I've got them written here somewhere. So we've got meaningful work, strong management, positive workplaces, health and well-being, growth opportunity, and trust in the organisation, which has all come off the back of our employee value proposition work. And so off the back of that, we want to look at our culture and refresh our culture. And we don't know yet, we're yet to start that work. And, we need to ask the questions of, are we a customer-centric culture? Are we a delivery first? Are we a transforming culture? But whatever we do, we also then want to look at, we want it to be what inspires our people. And then we'll look at the values of what are the values that promote that culture. So I'm really looking forward to kicking that work off with people and culture.
Winning at work, that's such a great phrase, especially when you're working for Lotto in New Zealand. Yeah. So another thing that's, of concern when it comes to people is our IT roles not really reflecting the Aotearoa that we live in. And we know that, our rates of Māori and Pacifica in IT roles is way below where it should be. Same, even though there's been improvements in terms of women in IT, there's still not a lot of women in senior roles in IT. So why do you think we don't have enough diversity in IT roles? And what are some practical things that can be done to better reflect the country that we live in?
One of the things I'm really strong on is, because I asked my daughters when they were growing up, why don't you get why aren't you interested in IT? It's a great profession, I've been in here a long time. And they have the traditional view of technical geeks. Why would I want to be, that doesn't interest me. And for me, I'm really keen for IT to be looked at schools as much broader, and I like the term digital because digital takes in that broader focus. You've got the front end, you've got the creative, you've got the engagement with our customer, and I think that's really important to engage a broader cross-section across our New Zealand young people. And I think the other thing is when they were going through university, as I said to them, how much digital training do you have in your training as a professional? And they said very little. So again, I think that's really important because, across all of New Zealand, across all of our cultures, we have people in all sorts of professions. And I think it's important to have that digital training to say, how can technology be leveraged to advance our profession. And this could be, right across organised professions. So I've always found, in terms of culture though, the organisations I've worked for are fairly diverse in their digital teams. I have found them reasonably reflective of New Zealand culture, but I think that's because of the companies I choose to work for. And I think more and more people are making these choices. They're looking for companies who understand and value diversity and social responsibility. So I think companies need to look at this as a whole.
Absolutely. And if you have diversity, you attract more diversity. Yeah, some really great points there. So you've touched on this earlier when you were talking about some of the successful, some of the key attributes a successful modern day CIO should have in thinking about resilience and failures. So what are some of the, what have been some of the mistakes that you've made along the way that have really shaped you as a leader and that you've really learned from?
One's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one, I guess. And that I've seen the impact of not addressing staff issues on an organisation. And at the very least, it can be creating a blockage, or it can, at the worst, it can take down a whole program and even ruin careers. And so you have to, and I don't have all the answers, but you have to understand people's perspectives, people's point of views, take the time to listen, understand the resistance, understand what's behind that, and really have the conversations. And look, sometimes it does turn south. You still have to address it. That's where you get guidance from professionals. You make sure you're following your policies and your procedures. But I've seen the biggest mistake is to think the issue will go away or ignore the issue. And you do have to front it head on and have those brave conversations. And sometimes it's sit down and have a coffee, but don't, if some behaviour led to some, pretty poor impacts on others, but you then should discuss that, have that conversation, discuss it with them. So that's probably my biggest mistake, is not doing it.
Yeah,
and the consequences.
Yeah, it can be really hard, can't it, when it's an issue, and it's and sometimes it's hard to address it head on. And I think it's something a lot of leaders struggle with at times. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. So what's some of the best career advice you've ever received?
One very early on actually was 5 things will go wrong today. By the 6th, come and talk to me. And I thought, that was I was a young project manager, and it completely resonated, because I thought it just led to me learning about problem management. So I can actually deal with that. I don't know why I'm coming in to you, so, but there is the times when I know I can't deal with that. But what it allowed me, or encouraged me to do, I guess, was to say, what is the problem I have? What is the options for managing this problem? And if I come to you, what exactly am I asking of you? And it's really helped me, and I think I'm still learning this, because you can go whinging to your CEO, but I've decided you can do that once a month if you're lucky, and you really should be following the same formula that I learned. I think what was one of the other ones was, and I know everyone hears this, and it grates everybody, but let me talk about it anyway. And that is that, don't take things too personally, because at the end of the day, it's often about business or someone else's agenda. And, I'm a really strong advocate for circle of influence, circle of control, and what's completely outside your control. You can spend a lot of energy in what's completely outside of your control. So my advice was, know your strengths, value, and the value that you bring. Seek help to address any areas for improvement, and it may be training, it may be learning from others, or it may simply be experience that you grow over time. But at the end of the day, if it's not working, move on, because there is another company out there who would love to have you and really appreciate those strengths that you bring, and don't forget that. And I think the other advice I receive, and I think we've all had this, but it's hard to do, is at the end of the day, leave it at the door. you know, enjoy your journey home. It can take a while in some cities. You know, enjoy that time with family and friends, you know, and get that exercise, have that fun, because life is out there, and we have very busy jobs. We often don't get thanked for all that we do. So you've got to make sure you're still enjoying it, and that you're there for the right reasons.
Absolutely. One of my favorite sayings, and it resonates with what you said there, is being responsible for the energy you bring to work and being responsible for the energy you take away from work. And yeah, just on that whole work-life balance or interactions, that you are being, you know, very mindful of how you feel when you leave the day and when you start the day.
Yeah, that's good.
So Sarah, can you tell us what's important to you in the months ahead?
It probably wraps up my whole conversation, really, is just don't be consumed by busyness for me. It's just take a step back, and really enjoy the exciting work underway. We've got an amazing program underway, and it can feel overwhelming at times, but just remember that it is linked to the strategy and how celebrate as we deliver. Because it's easy to just keep driving forward, but you've got to stop and celebrate and reflect, and keep linking back to the goals and strategy, so that you can maintain that clear line of sight. I think I'm going to enjoy the ongoing conversations with the Lotto staff, listening to new ideas, which I love to hear about, and also make sure I'm having conversations outside of the organisation, because that's where we learn from others, particularly on their transformation journeys, and I always want to look and bring learnings back into Lotto.
Great, all about celebrating the wins, and we'd expect nothing less than that at Lotto New Zealand. Sarah Thirlwell, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.